A fortune worth hundreds of millions of dollars was supposed to unite one family for generations. Instead, it tore them apart in a matter of days. When respected businessman Michael Harrison died shortly after signing documents that would reshape his entire estate, authorities initially believed they were looking at a tragic accident. But Detective Ethan Cole noticed something everyone else had overlooked. One signature didn't match. One page from the inheritance file had vanished. And while grief consumed the Harrison family, one relative appeared unusually calm as lawyers froze the estate and police reopened the investigation. What began as a routine transfer of wealth quickly became a murder inquiry that would expose buried secrets, broken trust, and questions no one was prepared to answer. How could a single inheritance document transform an ordinary death into one of the most controversial murder investigations in recent memory? And why would someone risk everything for a fortune they hadn't even received yet? Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that like, subscribe, and turn on your notifications button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The investigation hadn't even begun, yet somewhere behind closed doors, someone was already destroying evidence. Michael Harrison had spent decades building a business empire that reached far beyond the public eye. His companies employed thousands, his charitable foundation funded hospitals and schools, and his influence extended into boardrooms where a single decision could move millions of dollars. To the outside world, the Harrison family represented success, stability, and unity. Standing beside Michael were his adult son, Ryan Harrison, his daughter, Olivia Harrison, the family's trusted attorney, Benjamin Foster, several longtime business partners, loyal household staff who had served the family for years, and Charles Bennett, the meticulous accountant who had managed the Harrison finances for more than 2 decades. Together, they appeared to be protecting a remarkable legacy. But as Detective Ethan Cole began interviewing those closest to Michael, he discovered that polished public appearances often concealed private disagreements. Every conversation revealed another inconsistency, another unanswered question, and another reason to believe that Michael's death deserved far closer examination. Was Michael Harrison's death really an accident, or had someone been waiting for the perfect opportunity? Who stood to inherit the enormous fortune now locked behind legal proceedings? Had someone quietly altered the final version of Michael's will before it could be executed? Why were key financial records suddenly missing, and who had access to them during the days leading up to his death? Most importantly, who benefited the most if the billionaire patriarch never had the chance to explain his final decisions? As investigators worked through thousands of pages of financial records and interviewed everyone connected to the Harrison empire, they uncovered references to hidden estate documents, confidential business agreements, anonymous phone calls made in the middle of the night, and financial files that seemed to have disappeared without explanation. One witness, silent for years, would eventually come forward with information that detectives believed could change the entire investigation. Then investigators noticed one overlooked detail that had been sitting in the evidence room from the very beginning. Because this wasn't simply about money. It was about secrets that had been buried for decades. Michael Harrison's story was often described as the American dream brought to life. Raised in a modest household where every dollar mattered, he learned from an early age that opportunity was earned through determination rather than inherited through privilege. After graduating from college, he launched a small investment company with little more than ambition and an unwavering belief that disciplined decisions would eventually outweigh short-term risks. Over the following 3 decades, that modest venture expanded into an international business empire with interests in commercial real estate, financial services, luxury hospitality, and technology. Newspapers celebrated him as a visionary entrepreneur, television networks regularly sought his opinion on economic issues, and charitable organizations praised his generous donations to hospitals, scholarships, and community development projects. To millions, Michael Harrison represented integrity, success, and influence. He appeared to have achieved everything a person could hope for, yet the greater his fortune became, the more complicated his private life quietly grew. Behind the polished interviews and carefully managed public image, enormous expectations rested on every decision he made, especially those involving the future of the Harrison empire and the legacy he would eventually leave behind. Standing beside Michael was his wife, Elizabeth Harrison, whose calm public presence helped strengthen the family's respected reputation. Their son, Ryan Harrison, had spent years preparing to assume a leadership role within the company, while their daughter, Olivia Harrison, had chosen a different path by focusing on the family's charitable foundation. Around them stood trusted business executives, influential board members, family attorney Benjamin Foster, and longtime accountant Charles Bennett, each playing an important role in protecting the empire Michael had spent his lifetime building. Outwardly, loyalty seemed unquestionable. Board meetings ended with unanimous decisions, family gatherings projected warmth, and every public appearance reinforced the image of complete unity. Yet Detective Ethan Cole would later discover that beneath those carefully maintained relationships were disagreements over succession, control, and the future direction of the company. Michael's estate included international investments, privately held corporations, luxury homes across several countries, valuable art collections, and offshore assets that together were worth hundreds of millions of dollars. According to the existing estate plan, every major beneficiary already knew what they were expected to receive. Then, only weeks before his death, Michael Harrison quietly instructed Benjamin Foster to amend part of his will. The revised document was completed in strict confidence, shared with no one else, and its contents remained unknown. When investigators later uncovered evidence that the changes had been made, one question immediately overshadowed every other. Why had Michael Harrison decided to rewrite part of his legacy just before he died? During the weeks following the quiet revision of his will, Michael Harrison's carefully organized world began to change in ways that few people around him fully understood. It started with anonymous emails arriving late at night, each containing vague warnings about betrayal and unfinished business inside the Harrison empire. Most carried no signature, no traceable address, and no direct threats. Yet their timing unsettled Michael enough that he stopped dismissing them as harmless messages. Then came a series of private meetings that appeared nowhere on his official calendar. Michael left the office through side entrances, meeting individuals whose identities remained unknown even after detectives reviewed security logs. Around the same time, his phone records revealed several calls lasting only a few seconds before ending abruptly. Investigators later learned that each disconnected call came from unregistered numbers that vanished almost as quickly as they appeared. The mystery deepened further when security cameras protecting one section of Harrison headquarters unexpectedly stopped recording for nearly 12 minutes on a single evening. Technicians found no obvious malfunction, yet during that unexplained gap, confidential company documents relating to ownership transfers and estate planning disappeared from a secured archive. When Detective Ethan Cole reconstructed the timeline months later, every one of those unusual events appeared connected, though no one could yet explain how. Before his death, Michael confided in his oldest friend, retired Judge Thomas Reed, speaking with a seriousness Thomas had never witnessed before. Michael quietly told him, "If anything happens to me, don't believe the first explanation." Thomas would keep those words to himself until investigators finally came knocking. Those closest to Michael also noticed changes in his behavior that were impossible to ignore. A man once known for maintaining a predictable routine suddenly began canceling important meetings without explanation. Charity appearances that had been scheduled months in advance were quietly withdrawn. He avoided private conversations with certain members of his own family, insisting instead that discussions about the company take place only in the presence of attorney Benjamin Foster or accountant Charles Bennett. Even longtime employees commented that Michael seemed distracted, frequently looking over his shoulder as though expecting someone to appear unexpectedly. He instructed the estate's security team to increase patrols around his residence, replace access codes throughout several company buildings, and limit visitor access despite receiving no publicly known threats. Elizabeth Harrison repeatedly asked whether something was wrong, while Ryan and Olivia struggled to understand why their father had become increasingly guarded. Michael offered no clear explanation, only reassuring everyone that he was being cautious. Detective Ethan Cole would later describe those final days as the moment when Michael seemed to realize a danger was much closer than anyone else believed. Then, exactly 3 days later, everything changed. 48 hours before Michael Harrison's death, every hour of his schedule appeared ordinary, Yet investigators would later conclude that those final moments contained nearly every clue they needed. The morning began with a board meeting at Harrison Global Holdings, where Michael reviewed quarterly reports alongside senior executives and board members. Witnesses described him as focused but unusually reserved, speaking only when necessary and ending the meeting earlier than expected. Shortly afterward, he met privately with Elizabeth Harrison for lunch at one of their favorite restaurants, where surveillance footage captured them smiling, though staff later remembered the conversation becoming noticeably serious before they left. That afternoon, Michael drove alone to attorney Benjamin Foster's office carrying a sealed leather portfolio. Behind closed doors, the two spent nearly 2 hours reviewing confidential legal documents connected to the revised estate plan. Neither man disclosed what was discussed, but Benjamin would later admit that Michael appeared determined to finalize one last decision before it was too late. As evening approached, an unexpected visitor arrived at Michael's residence. Security logs confirmed the visit, yet the visitor's identity had somehow been erased from the electronic access records. That night, the Harrison family gathered for dinner, where Ryan and Olivia noticed their father seemed distracted despite trying to keep the conversation light. After everyone retired for the evening, Michael received a late-night phone call that lasted less than 3 minutes. Investigators never recovered the complete recording, only enough phone records to confirm the call had taken place. Before going to bed, Michael signed one final legal document prepared by Benjamin Foster, placed it inside his personal safe, and quietly told his assistant that several appointments scheduled for the following week would no longer be necessary. The next morning, the routine inside the Harrison estate was broken by an unsettling silence. Michael Harrison failed to appear for breakfast, something his staff said had never happened without prior notice. After repeated knocks on his study door went unanswered, security personnel entered the room and found him unresponsive in his favorite chair. Emergency medical teams arrived within minutes, but there was nothing they could do. Authorities initially believed they were dealing with natural causes. There were no obvious signs of violence, no forced entry, and nothing inside the room appeared disturbed. Elizabeth Harrison was overcome with grief as Ryan and Olivia struggled to understand how a man who had seemed determined to protect his future could be gone so suddenly. Attorney Benjamin Foster arrived shortly afterward, followed by accountant Charles Bennett and several senior executives, each aware that Michael's death would immediately trigger the legal process surrounding one of the country's largest private fortunes. Detectives began asking routine questions while medical examiners prepared their preliminary findings, believing the case would soon be closed. But as Detective Ethan Cole slowly examined the documents scattered across Michael's desk, he paused over one detail no one else had noticed. At first glance, it seemed insignificant. Yet within hours, that single discovery would transform an apparent natural death into the beginning of a murder investigation. Detective Ethan Cole refused to close Michael Harrison's file until every unanswered question had been addressed. Although the preliminary medical findings pointed toward natural causes, the missing page from the estate documents and the inconsistencies surrounding Michael's final days convinced investigators that something far more complicated had taken place. Within 48 hours, the case was officially reopened, and a full criminal investigation began. Forensic specialists returned to the Harrison estate, examining every room, every document, and every electronic device Michael had used during his final weeks. Experts searched for fingerprints, trace evidence, and anything that could explain why a healthy businessman had suddenly died just days after rewriting part of his will. Estate records were carefully reviewed alongside earlier versions of the inheritance plan, revealing subtle changes that had never been disclosed to the rest of the family. Digital forensic analysts recovered deleted emails, encrypted files, and fragments of conversations investigators believed someone had intentionally erased. Michael's phone records were reconstructed minute by minute, exposing several unexplained calls placed shortly before his death. Financial investigators soon joined the inquiry after discovering transfers involving shell companies and complex investment accounts that appeared unrelated to the Harrison Empire's legitimate business operations. The deeper Detective Ethan Cole looked, the clearer it became that Michael's death could no longer be viewed in isolation. Every financial record, every altered document, and every deleted message seemed connected by an invisible thread that someone had worked very hard to keep hidden. As investigators widened their search, suspicion reached nearly every member of the Harrison family. Ryan Harrison became the first major suspect after detectives learned he had argued privately with his father over the future leadership of the company only days before Michael died. Although Ryan insisted the disagreement had been resolved, investigators carefully examined his financial records and movements during the final 48 hours. Olivia Harrison was also questioned after emails suggested she had opposed recent changes to the family's charitable foundation, though no evidence placed her at the center of any criminal act. Then attorney Benjamin Foster unexpectedly disappeared for nearly 2 days without informing investigators of his whereabouts, fueling speculation that he might have been protecting confidential information or someone much closer to the family. When he eventually returned, Benjamin explained that he had been meeting with another client overseas, yet Detective Ethan Cole remained unconvinced. The investigation took another unexpected turn when longtime accountant Charles Bennett revised part of his original statement, admitting he had overlooked several unusual transactions involving millions of dollars that could not be fully explained. Those missing funds appeared to have passed through multiple accounts before disappearing entirely, leaving investigators with more questions than answers. Soon the story dominated international headlines. Television networks debated every new development, newspapers published competing theories, and social media filled with endless speculation. Some believed the Harrison family had orchestrated an elaborate conspiracy to secure the inheritance. Others suspected powerful business rivals who stood to gain from Michael's death. Many became convinced the murder had been planned long before the revised will was signed. Yet despite countless theories, no single explanation satisfied the growing mountain of evidence. Then, while conducting another search inside Michael Harrison's private study, investigators discovered something no one knew existed. Hidden behind an antique bookshelf was a concealed safe built into the wall, and what lay inside had the potential to change the entire investigation once again. Detective Ethan Cole waited as forensic technicians carefully opened the concealed safe hidden behind the antique bookshelf in Michael Harrison's private study. Everyone expected to find little more than jewelry or emergency cash. Instead, they uncovered a collection of documents that immediately transformed the investigation. Resting neatly inside was an earlier version of Michael Harrison's will, signed several months before the revised document prepared by attorney Benjamin Foster. Unlike the latest version, this original will divided the estate in a completely different way, leaving investigators wondering why Michael had chosen to rewrite such significant portions of his legacy. Beneath it were dozens of private handwritten letters exchanged between Michael and individuals whose names had never appeared during the investigation. Some described growing concerns about loyalty inside the Harrison empire, while others hinted that Michael no longer trusted everyone closest to him. Investigators also recovered detailed bank records showing large financial transfers between holding companies and offshore accounts that had never been disclosed during probate proceedings. Mixed among those papers were confidential ownership agreements revealing that several valuable companies believed to belong entirely to Michael had quietly been transferred into new legal structures only weeks before his death. Then Detective Ethan Cole unfolded a single handwritten note placed inside an unmarked envelope. The message contained only a few short sentences, yet every person in the room immediately understood its significance. Michael had written that if anything happened before he could explain his recent decisions, investigators should look beyond the inheritance itself because the fortune was only part of the story. That discovery forced detectives to reconsider every assumption they had made since the investigation began, shifting their attention away from simple financial gain and toward a much larger pattern of deception that had remained hidden in plain sight. As investigators continued examining the newly discovered evidence, the emotional pressure inside the Harrison family finally reached its breaking point. After days of questioning and months of carrying a burden alone, Olivia Harrison asked to speak privately with Detective Ethan Cole. Fighting back tears, she admitted there was something she had never told anyone because she believed revealing it would destroy what remained of her family. Olivia explained that several weeks before Michael's death, her father had confided that he believed someone close to him had been secretly manipulating company decisions and attempting to influence the future distribution of the estate. He never identified that person by name. But he warned Olivia that if he suddenly died before exposing the truth, the family should trust evidence rather than appearances. She also revealed that on the evening before his death, Michael had given her a brief but unforgettable piece of advice, telling her never to sign any legal document until every unanswered question had been resolved. Detective Ethan Cole realized this statement perfectly matched the warning found inside the safe, confirming that Michael had anticipated serious trouble long before anyone realized his life was in danger. Suddenly, Ryan Harrison's earlier disagreements, Benjamin Foster's unexplained absence, Charles Bennett's revised testimony, and the missing financial records no longer appeared to be isolated events. They looked like pieces of a carefully connected puzzle. Yet even after uncovering hidden wills, confidential letters, secret ownership documents, and Michael's own handwritten warning, one question still refused to disappear. Among everyone connected to the Harrison empire, who had truly benefited the most from Michael Harrison's death? As detectives assembled every piece of evidence collected over the course of the investigation, Detective Ethan Cole insisted on reconstructing Michael Harrison's final weeks minute by minute. Phone records were matched with surveillance footage, financial transactions were compared against legal documents, and witness statements were carefully arranged in chronological order until a clear pattern finally emerged. Michael had not rewritten part of his will because he wanted to reward one family member over another. He had done it because he had quietly discovered that someone inside his trusted circle had been exploiting the Harrison empire through hidden ownership agreements and unauthorized financial transfers. The revised will was designed to prevent that individual from gaining control of key companies after his death. And if the changes became legally effective, years of carefully concealed financial manipulation would be exposed. That realization revealed the true motive. The enormous fortune itself had become the trigger for everything that followed. Investigators concluded that hidden financial pressure had been building for years, as debts, secret investments, and undisclosed business commitments placed one influential figure under enormous strain. Michael's decision to alter the inheritance threatened not only future wealth, but also the collapse of an elaborate deception that had remained hidden inside the company for years. The carefully planned scheme relied on everyone believing Michael's death was both natural and untimely, allowing altered financial arrangements to pass through probate before anyone questioned them. Instead, Detective Ethan Cole's attention to one missing page disrupted the entire plan. Suddenly, every unexplained event fit together. The anonymous emails had been warnings. The late-night meetings involved Michael seeking legal protection. The disappearing financial records had been an attempt to erase evidence. The brief security camera failure coincided with confidential documents being removed. Benjamin Foster's private legal meetings centered on protecting Michael's revised estate plan, while Charles Bennett's changed testimony reflected his realization that missing transactions could no longer remain hidden. Even Michael's final words to Thomas Reed and Olivia Harrison now carried new meaning. He had known the greatest danger was never the money itself, but the lengths someone would go to protect control of it. The fortune had not simply followed the investigation. It had become the reason the investigation existed in the first place. When prosecutors presented the complete financial reconstruction, the Harrison family was forced to confront a painful reality that reached far beyond legal documents and bank accounts. Detective Ethan Cole reminded everyone involved that greed rarely begins with a single decision. It grows quietly through small compromises until loyalty gives way to ambition and trust is replaced by suspicion. Michael Harrison had spent a lifetime building an empire intended to secure his family's future, yet the very fortune he hoped would protect those he loved became the source of division, fear, and devastating loss. Ryan Harrison and Olivia Harrison eventually recognized that their father's greatest concern had never been preserving wealth alone, but preserving the values that created it. Elizabeth Harrison later described the investigation as proof that money could purchase influence, property, and success, but it could never guarantee honesty or peace within a family. For Detective Ethan Cole, justice meant uncovering the truth even when it challenged every assumption made at the beginning of the case. Yet the story was not over. Years after the investigation officially concluded, while archived evidence was being reorganized, a forgotten legal document was discovered inside a sealed storage box that had never been fully cataloged. Its contents raised one unsettling possibility. Had investigators uncovered the entire truth, or had one final secret remained hidden all along? As Detective Ethan Cole reopened the archived evidence, the forgotten document immediately explained why the investigation had nearly reached the wrong conclusion. It wasn't another version of Michael Harrison's will, nor was it another financial statement. It was a confidential memorandum prepared months before Michael's death, documenting a private internal audit that had never been shared with law enforcement. The report revealed that one of the Harrison empire's most trusted insiders had quietly manipulated ownership records, concealed unauthorized financial transfers, and created a network of shell companies designed to benefit if Michael's revised inheritance plan never took effect. The motive had never been simple revenge or family resentment. It was control. Michael's decision to rewrite part of his estate threatened to expose years of carefully hidden financial misconduct, placing everything the mastermind had built at risk. Detectives now understood why critical documents had disappeared from company archives, why security cameras had briefly stopped recording, and why anonymous warnings had been sent before Michael's death. Every missing page, every unexplained bank transfer, every deleted email, and every suspicious meeting had served a single purpose: to delay discovery long enough for the original inheritance process to move forward without raising suspicion. Even Benjamin Foster's temporary disappearance and Charles Bennett's revised testimony suddenly made sense once investigators realized both men had uncovered fragments of the deception at different moments, but had failed to see the complete picture until much later. Detective Ethan Cole admitted that if he had accepted the initial medical findings without questioning the missing page from Michael's estate file, the case would almost certainly have been closed as a natural death, allowing the deception to remain hidden indefinitely. Looking back, every clue had been present from the very beginning. The anonymous emails, the unexplained late-night meetings, the disappearing financial records, the 12-minute security camera failure, Michael Harrison's warning to Thomas Reed, his conversation with Olivia Harrison, the revised will, and the handwritten note hidden inside the concealed safe all pointed toward the same truth. None of those events existed in isolation. Together, they formed a trail that quietly revealed how the mystery had been unfolding long before Michael's final 48 hours. What first appeared to be an ordinary inheritance dispute gradually became the key to exposing a carefully organized deception that reached deep into the Harrison empire itself. For Elizabeth Harrison, Ryan Harrison, and Olivia Harrison, the investigation became a painful reminder that the greatest threats often come from places where trust once seemed unquestionable. Detective Ethan Cole eventually closed the case knowing the evidence had answered the legal questions, but some emotional questions could never be resolved inside a courtroom. Can money destroy even the strongest families? Can justice ever feel complete after years of deception and broken trust? Or does every search for the truth leave behind questions that no investigation can ever fully answer? As Detective Ethan Cole filed the final report, and the Harrison estate slowly returned to a sense of normality, one truth remained impossible to ignore. Michael Harrison had spent a lifetime building a fortune he believed would protect the people he loved, yet it became the very reason their lives were forever changed. The investigation proved that wealth can open doors, create opportunity, and build remarkable legacies, but it can also test loyalty, expose hidden ambitions, and reveal truths that remain buried until someone has the courage to uncover them. Although the legal case eventually reached its conclusion, the emotional scars left behind would remain with the Harrison family for years. Michael's final warning had been heard. Detective Ethan Cole had refused to overlook the smallest details, and justice had followed the evidence wherever it led. But as with many investigations, the answers solved one mystery while leaving others open to interpretation. Perhaps that is why stories like this continue to fascinate us. They remind us that the smallest clue can change everything, and that the truth often waits where no one thinks to look. Now we'd love to hear your thoughts. If you had been the lead investigator, which clue would you have examined first? Was it the missing page from Michael Harrison's inheritance documents, the anonymous emails, the hidden safe, or something else entirely? At what point did you begin to suspect that Michael's death was more than a tragic accident? And after hearing every piece of evidence, do you believe justice was fully served, or do you think some questions will always remain unanswered? Share your theory in the comments below because your perspective might uncover something others missed. If you enjoyed this documentary and want more suspenseful investigations filled with unexpected twists, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story. And if you thought this case was unforgettable, wait until our next investigation, where a powerful CEO vanishes after boarding a private jet that lands safely with no passengers on board.